Hi guys, this is Tech Howdy. I welcome you to another video tutorial on creating an ASP.NET Core application with Angular 7. In the last video tutorial, we added the required attributes that are needed to load our data table for the products in our browser. So inside the product list component HTML, we added the options to load the data table, and we added the data option and data trigger option here. We also added the data inside the columns by using the properties for the product. Now when we go back to our application, we don't see any errors because we have imported the modules that are needed to load data table inside the products component as well as inside the root of our application. Now the next thing that we are going to do in this video tutorial is try to make sure that we add some kind of authentication so that we can fix this issue here, which is 401 not authorized, which means that when we are trying to get the products using the API to get products, we are not able to fetch any data and we are not able to trigger our table because we are not authorized to get the data. We are only authorized to get the data if we log into the application and we provide or attach the JWT token to our request that we are making to get the data. So let's first log into the application. So I've logged inside the application, and now let me try to access the uh, products component. Let's see if I still get error, because obviously I will get error because I have not written any code to attach the JWT token, but I know that I have a token. So as you see, I'm still getting an error which is 401 unauthorized. That's because even though I'm authenticated, and if I go to my console, let me just say local storage dot get item, and I'm going to get the JWT token, and the key to access my JWT token is JWT. I'm going to hit enter. So as you see, I have the token, but I'm still not authorized because when I'm making the request, I'm not attaching the token. And that's what we are going to do in this video tutorial. We are going to make sure that we attach this token to this request so that whenever we want to access the products with the valid token, the server does allow us to view the products. So let's go back to our application and go back to the product list component.ts. And now we will start working on the code that is required to attach this token. So guys, now since we want to attach the token, we would have to create an auth guard service. What does an auth guard service do? It will look after all the authentication and authorization that is needed for a component, which means that in your application, if there are any components that need authorization, then this service will be responsible to check if that client is authorized to view that component. Instead of writing the code on each and every component to verify if that client is authorized and authenticated, we will create a separate service for that. And whenever we need to verify the details, we will ask that service to do it for us. And if the service returns true, which says that the user is authorized to view the component, then we will allow the user to view the component instead of throwing an unauthorized error. So as we all know, whenever we want to create a service inside our application, we are going to go ahead and open our terminal. So go to your client app, right click tools and open terminal. And in your client app, let's go ahead and create a service inside a folder called as guards. So the command is ngg, that's generate service. So we'll use S, and then the folder would be called as guards, guards, and / the name of the service that we want to create. So I'm going to call it as Auth Guard, G-U-A-R-D, Auth Guard Service. So I'm going to hit enter, and now Angular is going to create that service to guard my components inside a folder called as guards. So I have it here, and I have two files. So in my authguard service.ts, now I'm going to write the code that I would need to attach the JWT token to the request. So the first thing that we want to do is make sure that our AuthGuard service class implements the can activate interface. So make sure that when you select can activate, you're selecting the interface and not the component or the class. We're selecting the can activate interface. So it implements can activate interface, which is a part of Angular router. And once again, I'm going to get rid of this module folder because I am loading it from Angular router. Now, the can activate method or the interface requires us to instantiate a method called as can activate. And we are using this method or this interface can activate because it gives us access to this method called as can activate, which will check for us if the client making the request can activate a specific route or activate a specific component. Does that specific client have an authority to do that? So a can activate method will check and return a response. The response is always going to be true. Therefore, we have to write a logic inside this can activate method to handle the response and then redirect the user to a specific route based on the response we get. Now, the can activate method, we are going to pass two parameters. One will be route, which is of type activated route snapshot. And the second parameter that we are going to pass, we are going to call this as state, which is going to be of router state snapshot. So router snapshot, and this has been imported from Angular router. Now, why do we need this activated route snapshot and why do we need this router state snapshot? Now, the route variable or the route object will keep track of all the activated routes by the client. For example, when I go back to my application, and let's say I am on the home page of my application, and I have not yet logged inside the application. And without logging into the application, I'm trying to access the product component. And obviously, at this point, I would be allowed to access it because we have not yet added the authorization. So let's say if I had not been authorized, then I should be redirected to the login page instead of the product component so that I can log in. Once I am logged in, then I should be redirected to the products component. That's because that's the route that I was initially trying to visit from my URL. But I would be redirected to the home page. That's because we have mentioned in the logging method that once we log into the application, the client should be redirected to the home page. So that's the default functionality. Therefore, we need to make sure that if some client is trying to access a specific route, which requires them to log in, after they have been authenticated, they should be redirected to that specific route that they were trying to initially visit. And to keep track of what route they have actually visited, activated route snapshot object will keep track of all those activated routes. And then to access or return that route back to the client, we will use the state object, which is the type of router state snapshot. And we will see this as we code this method. Now the return type of our can activate method will be an observable type. So let's go ahead and create an observable type of Boolean because this method will return true always. And here, let me just import this from RxJS instead of node modules. Now, the next thing that I want to do is here, I want to make sure that I write the logic that needs to be used to manage the activation of a route. So first thing that I want to do is return if the user is logged in or if the user is not logged in. And to access if the user is logged in, we will get that information from account service class, and we have a getter created inside the account service called as isLoggedIn, which returns the value of the login status of the user as an observable. Since the value is going to be of type observable, we obviously need to extract the value from that observable type result. So first thing that we want to do is, in order to access that getter, we need to create an object of account service type. So let's do that. So here I'm going to add this account service, and I am going to add the missing import statement. Also, let's change this here. I need to use the take operator now. So first thing that I want to do is account object dot the is logged in getter. Then I want to call the pipe method on the result. And inside the pipe method, the first method I'm going to call is the take method. So within the observable type, the first result or the first value that is emitted by this observable type, I need the value of that first result. So therefore, I'm going to call the take method, and I will specify the value that I want. I want the value, the first value, so I will specify 1 as the parameter. Now the take method helps us to access the first emitted value by an observable. Okay, so that's why we have used it here. Next thing is the second method in the sequence that we want to execute is the map method. And inside the map method, first parameter that we want to pass is the login status. So we will create a logins object called as login status, whose type is going to be Boolean. And then what we want to do is use the lambda expression, and within this lambda expression we will specify what we want to do with this result of login status. So let's add the import map from RxJS operators map, and they should fix the error on map method. So we're still getting this error because we have not yet returned anything. So this method cannot return a void value. So we have to return. So we're going to return false just to get rid of this error. But before we return the Boolean value, we need to make sure that we write the logic here. So we would require two objects that will store value of the destination URL which the user is trying to visit, and we would need another variable that will hold the value of the product ID that the user was trying to view. So if I go back to my browser and show you that, let's say the user is not logged in and he's trying to access the product with ID 5, then I need to get the value of this ID so that I can redirect the user to the correct product after the user has logged in. And to get the ID and store it in a variable, I'll call that variable as product ID. Now both these variables will be constant variables, so they cannot be changed, and the values will be provided by the canActivate method. So let's create these variables. So the first one is called as destination, the second one is called as product ID. And the destination variable is of type string, and the value I have initialized it to state.url. So our state object is of type router state snapshot, which basically will hold the value that needs to be redirected. Now, the product ID is basically the value of the ID which we can get from the activated route snapshot, which keeps track of all the activated routes by the client. So we will get the value of the ID from the last activated route using this route object route.params.id. Now we have these two variables here. Now the next thing that we want to do is we want to set a condition to check if user is logged in. If user is not logged in, then we redirect the user to the login page. And if the user is logged in, then we don't redirect the user to the login page. We just authorize, we check, we authenticate and authorize the user, correct? So that's why we will have a condition here at the very beginning that will check if the user status is logged in. So if the user is not login status, which is this object here, which will store the value of the first received value from our pipe method take, and then that value we will pass into this if condition to check if this value is true or false. If this value is not true, that means this value is false, the user is not logged in, then we will redirect the user to the login page. And to redirect the user to any page, we have used this in the login component as well. We need to make use of the router object. So I have created a router object inside the constructor and imported the router class from Angular router. So using the router object, I will call the navigate method, and inside the navigate method here we need to specify some parameters. The first parameter is which component do we want the client to be navigated to. So if the user is not logged in, I'm going to navigate the user to the login component. So /login component. And if the user after login, which means I've redirected the user to the login. Now the user has logged in. Now I need to redirect the user back to the previous route that he was trying to access. So for that, I'll open two curly braces and use the following key called as query params. And inside the query params, we will set the params. So the key for the value of the URL that we want the user to be returned, we will call it as return URL, and we will get the value for this key from our state object from the parameters from can activate. So state dot the URL property will contain the value of the URL. Now guys, if you have noticed, I have used this return URL key inside the login.component TS class. Now inside the login.component TS class, if you look at the on submit method, okay, so once the user has logged in, if you notice that we are using this return URL. So you might be wondering, when we created, where are we getting this return URL from? We are getting this from the query params. So the query params will set the value of return URL for us. So if there is any value inside this key, it will return the user there. If there is no value, then it will return the user to the default home page. So now the next thing that we want to do is, after we have navigated the user to the login page and the user is logged in, we need to specify a result to our canActivate method. As we all know that the canActivate method always returns true, therefore we have to return false here, saying that the user was not logged in, so it's false, correct? So that should be it for this video tutorial. In the next video tutorial, we will continue coding this canActivate method, because we have to code another condition that if the user is already logged in, then obviously we cannot redirect the user to the login page. We have to just verify the authorization of the user if the user is authorized to visit the specific component, and that we are going to do here, which is if the user is already logged in. And here I should have said to check if the user is not logged in. Okay, so if the user is not logged in, we redirect the user to the navigation to the login component and return false. If the user is already logged in, then we write some logic here and then return false. So that logic I will do code it in the next video tutorial. Please like and subscribe my channel Tech Housey, and also don't forget that all this code is available in my DevOps repo, so it's free to download. Thank you once again.